Welcome to Podula Rasa. I'm David Blank.
And I'm Jim Esch.
This is a podcast about finding something in nothing.
Welcome to Podula Rasa. My name's Jim.
And I think I'm Dave.
And we are very happy to be back. It's been a while since we've done a podcast. We've been busy. Dave and I have been through a lot of changes this summer, and we'll have more to discuss on that score in future episodes, no doubt. But the theme for this episode is a heady topic, non-duality and ego attachment or de-attachment, unattachment. Dave, are you ready to dig into this topic?
I'm ready to figure out what's real.
Ready to rock. Okay. So this started with the other day. I was listening to Insight Timer. This is an app that we talk about a lot on the podcast. I love that app. And I was listening to a course on non-duality and the illusion of the ego and how we can transcend the ego. And I'm no expert on non-duality. I have a little familiarity with it, but, I just have a limited grasp of it. But as I grasp the concept, non-duality means that the subject-object relationship or the self-other dichotomy, the mind-body split, is an illusion. In fact, your ego, my ego, the self is an illusion too. And depending on your belief system, most of this comes out of Eastern philosophy and religion, there's a true self beyond the ego that you could think of as consciousness or some kind of an awareness, which is shared by all beings. The some Buddhist schools might call it no self. There's nothing behind the curtain, so to speak. And I am putting that crudely, but you get the idea. And Taoism, they would refer to maybe this as the Tao. And this course I was listening to teaches us that we can't really understand the truth of non-duality using our minds, our intellect, reason. We can't reason our way to that conclusion. And I kind of like that insight. I'm interested in the concept of non-duality, non-attachment, but I come from Western civilization, and we are pretty attached to our egos in the West. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense that you can't make sense of it in a way because you come from a tradition, as do I, as do we all, where we are separate from everything.
Right.
And so when you start off that you're separate, and as soon as I turn off the computer, you're gone, that negates the opportunity to see the whole picture.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I feel like I have a strong sense of ego, a sense of self. I think a lot about the arc of my life, where I've been, where I'm at now, where I'm headed. And I think about what will happen to my ego after death. Does it just poof, go away into the nothingness from which I arose? Or is there some kind of an afterlife? And who knows? But I feel that this embodied life that my ego inhabits is very real. It's all too real. But at the same time, I'd like the idea of detaching from that and tuning into this whatever it is beyond the non-dual true self or non-self or Tao. And occasionally meditation, contemplation opens up that view to me. I get glimpses of it, but it doesn't always last. And
when you say that it's real, does it have to be what you think it is for it to be real, or can there be something else and it's still real?
What do you mean?
Well, when you just said that it's very, your sense of ego and your sense of self is very real to you. Can't both things be true? In other words, can you assume that you are this separate entity, and yet a good friend might phone you out of the blue for the first time in years, and you might have just been thinking about them? Can't both things be the same? It can't both be true?
I think they can. I think they can be true. Like, again, like we like a lot of us get so stuck in dualism that it's like either or, right? It's either
Right.
this or that. But it's not. It's both and. right? I think
Right.
that's probably the ultimate answer.
So there's
But
your life inside the box and your life outside the box.
outside the box, right? So after thinking about this insight timer course, I had this little mini epiphany that, for me at least, pointed the way out of this mental trap I was in. And it's not that our ego self isn't real. Our egos, at least in my opinion, are real at some level. My body is real. The physical universe is real. It follows laws of physics that you know a lot more about than I do. And birth is real, growth is real, death is real. But what's illusory is that it's not like the whole truth. Maybe it's partial truth, but it's not the whole truth. It's not permanent truth. There may be this higher, deeper sense of a true self or no self. It's not permanent. But anyway, I it I got to this conclusion by analogy. I sort of realized that when I read fiction or drama or poems, I read about characters in a book who are obviously illusions, but those illusions are a joint project of the imagination of the writer, where that meets the reader's perception, the reader's imagination. At some level, that illusion is real. In the same way as a character in a book has that kind of level of reality, maybe our egos are character constructs too. But before I get too deep into this, I wanted to let Google Notebook LM do some talking. Um, what was your first exposure to Google Notebook LM? Was it my first exposure when we heard from our friend Jim?
Jim, yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Although
yeah,
we've been talking about AI for a long time, that was the first time that I
right.
had.
So
Yes.
Jim's our bandmate from Zeus and the Druid days, and he is he threw in some notes um, that he used when to prepare for a previous podcast that we did with him. And using this Google Notebook tool, you can generate a podcast conversation using AI, right? So it kind of blew my mind when he sent that to us. It was trippy, and I thought, well, I was preparing some show notes for this show, so I thought, let's experiment with the AI and see what it spits out. Here is a conversation that was generated using the AI, and I'd like to share it with the audience. And then on the other side of it, we'll comment.
Ever feel like, what if reality is like messing with us? Like it's some kind of cosmic joke. Like everything we think is real about us, about the world, is just this tiny piece of something way bigger and way weirder.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that non-duality thing we're diving into today, right?
It'll definitely get you thinking about, like, everything.
No kidding. Actually, this is from a listener. They send in some thoughts about, non-duality and pulled together some really interesting stuff. We're going to break it all down.
Oh, cool. Sounds like a deep dive.
Yeah, totally. So to get started, what even is non-duality? It's like this idea that the self, like the me, we feel like every day, with all its thoughts and feelings, maybe that's an illusion.
It's not that, like, our experiences aren't real, but non-duality makes us ask, is this separate self all there is?
Okay, now my brain's already doing backflips. Like, I'm sitting here, I know I'm me, I'm thinking thoughts.
Yeah. How can that be an illusion? Yeah, that's the whole paradox, right? And our listener, they really get into that. How can our everyday life feel so real if it's also an illusion? They mention some really fascinating sources, like, have you heard of Saqib Rizvi? He does work on Insight Timer, talks a lot about non-duality and this thing called ego transcendence.
Oh, okay, yeah. Before we get too far, we should probably define ego here, because it's not like being arrogant or full of yourself.
All right. Totally different thing. Here, ego is that feeling of being like a separate me, totally independent, cut off from everything and everyone else. It's that voice saying, this is me, this is mine.
And ego transcendence is like getting beyond that limited self then.
Exactly. It's like realizing there's this deeper reality and we're connected to something way bigger than just our little egos.
Our listener also mentioned Rupert Spira, who's big in the non-duality world. Is he on the same page?
Oh, for sure. Spira talks about a true self, which is what we find when we get past the illusion of the separate ego. It's not something we make up, it's something we discover by peeling back those layers of illusion.
Okay, so we've got true self versus the ego, which is an illusion. But what does that mean, that the ego is an illusion? Does that mean our experiences, our feelings aren't real?
That's a huge question, and it trips people up all the time with non-duality. It's super important to remember just because the ego might be an illusion doesn't mean we aren't real. We still feel joy, sadness, anger, all of it.
So it's not about erasing those feelings, but maybe seeing them differently.
Yes. Think of like a kaleidoscope. The colors and patterns are real, right? But they're made by the mirrors and light inside. Non-duality is kind of like realizing those mirrors are there, shaping how we see what's real.
Oh, I like that analogy. So the patterns are real, but knowing how they're made gives you a whole new appreciation.
Exactly. And our listener, they had this aha moment, connecting non-duality to something we do all the time, reading fiction.
Now that is interesting. Tell me more. Okay, so fiction. I got to know more about this.
So our listener was saying, like, when you get lost in a good book, right?
Yep.
Like, Hamlet.
Yeah.
Shakespeare, you know, those characters, the stuff
Yeah.
they go through, it feels real, even though we know deep down it's all made up.
Totally. You get so invested, their emotions, the drama. It's like you're right there with them.
Exactly. And that's what clicked for our listener. It's like with Hamlet, his pain, it feels real to us as readers, you know?
Right, right.
But then there's that other level, like zooming out, remembering Hamlet is just a story. Someone wrote that.
So non-duality is like that, zooming out, realizing there's
Yeah.
this whole bigger picture beyond just the characters and their little dramas.
Yeah, and get this, our listener, they found the same idea in another story, The Circular Ruins by Jorge Luis Borges.
Oh, Borges. He's so trippy. What's that one about again?
So it's about this magician, and he's like dreaming up a real person. Borges totally blurs the line between dreams and reality. You're like, wait, what's real here? And then, of course, that ending.
Oh, man, the ending. Where the magician realizes he might be someone else's dream.
Ugh.
Total mind bend.
Right. And that's exactly like non-duality. Like maybe we're all caught in these layers of reality and we don't even realize it.
So wait, are you saying our lives, everything we do, it's all less real because there might be this other bigger reality out there?
No, not less real. It's more like realizing there are different levels of realness. Like a character in a book doesn't know about the author, right? Maybe our minds are kind of like that. We don't see the whole picture of reality.
Okay, I think I get it. It's not about saying our experiences aren't real, but understanding that there might be a lot more to it than we can grasp.
That's it. And you know what else our listener pointed out? A poem that really gets at this feeling of illusion, a dream within a dream.
Fine, now he knew how to get into your head.
Mhm.
What's the connection to non-duality there?
This poem is all about uncertainty. Like the ground is constantly shifting under your feet. And there's this question Poe keeps asking, a question that's basically the heart of non-duality.
Okay, what's the question?
He asks, is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? He's hitting on that feeling of like, is this all real? What if there's more beyond what we're seeing right now?
Which brings us back to the big question of this whole deep dive. If we really think about this, that our lives, our egos, it's all real illusions, like a dream within a dream. What does that mean for us, like right now in our everyday lives?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's like our listener said, this doesn't mean our lives are meaningless just because there might be more to it. We still experience life, love, loss, joy, pain, all of it. That's real.
So it's not about like detaching from life, becoming indifferent.
Not at all. Some people would say it's the opposite. When we stop clinging so tightly to this idea of a separate me, that's when we can really connect with ourselves, other people, everything around us on a deeper level.
I can see that. Like
Yeah.
if we're not so caught up in our own heads or our little stories, maybe we can actually be present for life as it happens.
Exactly. And that's what our listener was saying, this idea that our lives are like stories within a bigger story. It can be really freeing.
Freeing how? Freeing how? And a cool thought, our lives as stories in some bigger thing.
Yeah, it's like we don't have to be so stressed about being in charge of our own happiness all the time, you know, like making sure everything's perfect, find all the meaning ourselves. We're part of something way bigger, even if we don't totally get it.
I like that. Instead of like, every choice matters, got to get it right.
Yeah.
It's more like surrendering to something bigger than us.
Right. And that surrender doesn't have to be passive. It can actually be really powerful once you shift your perspective. Our listener, they said it felt like being set free, like your story matters, but it's not all riding on you.
It's like, now we can just enjoy the story, right? We don't have to be the writer, stressing over every plot point, the ups, the downs. It's all part of this big, amazing tapestry.
Yes. And non-duality doesn't mean our choices don't matter or that our experiences aren't real. It just means there's this whole other context we might not even see.
This has been wild. From the ego being an illusion to that true self idea. We've talked about Shakespeare, Borges, even Edgar Allan Poe.
And through it all, we keep coming back to this. Maybe our lives really are like stories, part of something huge and mysterious.
So on that note, one last thing for our listeners to hug on. We've talked about our lives as stories being read. But what about the reader? If we're part of this bigger narrative, who or what is writing that? And does it change how we live our own stories, knowing that?
Ooh, now those are the questions.
Right. And on that note, we'll leave you all to ponder those mysteries. Reality, the self, the stories we tell ourselves. Keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.
All right, so that was the conversation. Dave, what did you think? What were your impressions?
Well, my initial thought is, if it was it was not if, it was generated by AI, does that make it any less real? In other words, because it was created and it exists now, and it exists in our heads, is it any less real than if it had come from another podcaster or anything else?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you just heard that podcast, if we had led with that conversation, who, like in the audience and audience members, you can react to this. Would you perceive that as just a real conversation between two people? I probably would. What's the difference?
I would argue that there is no difference. And once it's been birthed, it doesn't matter where it came from.
Right.
So
So I had a couple reactions when I first heard the thing. First of all, I was kind of blown away by how good it was. I love the banter between the two people. They sounded a lot more interesting than I am. I kind of wanted to fire myself and just say, let's just hire these guys and let them do the talking. And then also the female in the conversation, she sounds a little like Kamala Harris to me. Like they both sound like they're from California or something.
hmm.
But anyway, like I love the banter they had, like back and forth. The way they kind of they had a more flippant approach to the notes that I delivered to them than I was thinking of. So, the kind of way they batted it around it made it more fun somehow.
Well, and that comes from the nature of AI, that machine learning, that somebody programmed in, which says this is what sounds good on a podcast. This is so it's almost like you're looking at your notes through the lens of a focus group, if you will.
Right. But I think I had that, if I understand what your original comment, like these AI voices are characters in the same way that you have characters in a book, right?
Right. And it's what somebody thinks we want to hear.
Right. So whoever coded the algorithms,
Correct.
the engine, is kind of in some way like engineering like a set of expectations and patterns.
Or maybe it wasn't a person. Maybe it was just the engine itself combing through podcasts and saying, this is what the best ones sound like, or the ones that
Right.
get the most listens.
It's doing like pattern recognition and then kind of
Right.
like using that. I thought it did a pretty good job of summarizing a lot of the notes I did when I was talking about the examples of Hamlet and, how when I read Hamlet, that character feels very real to me, although up here I recognize it's an illusion, right? But that's sort of what I was trying to get at, where I feel like the ego has a reality to it, but it's not the whole reality. There's something illusory about it too,
Right.
right? And it cited the Jorge Luis Borges short story, The Circular Ruins. They mispronounced his name, but that's okay. We'll give him a pass on that. Um, they didn't summarize the whole story. Like they kind of really like crammed it down. It's a fascinating little story, but they basically got at the heart of that story where you have this man who's dreaming. It's a fantasy story, and he's like trying to dream a person into existence. So he spends all this time sleeping and dreaming, and the local natives kind of take care of him. He's like at this kind of circular temple where he's doing all this, and then eventually uh he does create like this person that sends him like upriver or downriver to kind of go on his way, and he wipes his memories, like so the creation doesn't know where he comes from, basically. And then at the end of the story, the dreamer who created this entity realizes that he's been a creation of someone else's dream. Uh, and it's just a great moment in the story.
So that's sort of connected to Jewish mythology in a way, that there's a disconnect between the source and us. And it's a very specific moment when the soul goes into the body, and then it's cut off. So you're not supposed to remember.
Yes, right.
And it's not that you can't remember. It's that you can't, but you're not supposed to in order to be a human being. At least the way I understand it, you have to not be connected to that anymore,
Right.
even though you are.
And it also like did a good job packaging like the Edgar Allan Poe poem, A Dream Within a
Yeah.
Dream, which kind of gets at the same concept. I wrote a paper in college about that poem. Uh, it really spoke to me back then, all those years ago. But one thing that it introduced that was not in my notes at all, they made some kind of analogy to a kaleidoscope, like,
Mm.
and that was not in my notes at all. Like the AI just came up with that. So I was like, wow, that's just bizarre. It's actually making connections and using its own examples based on what I fed it. It was,
Yeah. Although sometimes the AI gets it wrong. If you feed prompts into ChatGPT, for example, it'll make things up sometimes because it thinks it's right, or it thinks
it's trying.
it's trying, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure I totally followed the kaleidoscope example. Like, it was just from left field. I'm like, where did it come up with this? But it was kind of cool that it made that effort. The other thing I've thought was very curious and interesting, and in some weird way fits with the whole theme of this episode, is it was referring to me, who had given it notes to generate all this conversation.
You were the listener,
I'm the listener.
right?
Like, I thought I was the creator. Like I thought I was the dreamer, you know, and these podcast voices are the dream. But now all of a sudden I'm in a completely different position, like, so I love that actually. I was like, okay, this totally fits. Like the fact that you can do this with AI is just sort of another proof of the point I'm trying to make.
Yes. Yeah, maybe you can meditate on this and that transposition, and maybe understand non-duality on a different level, on a more real level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Do you think we should hire these guys? Like when we're really kind of scraping for ideas, we can just, hey, Google,
Make me a podcast.
make me a podcast. I don't know if I've made any sense in this podcast at all. I'm just kind of went off on this huge tangent, but it all sort of makes sense to me.
It does, and it's a lot of fun to think about. Just the nature of reality and what adds into it and what you take away, and I enjoy thinking about it.
It's a kind of what struck me is I've thought about these kind of things before. Like I said, I wrote that paper all the way back in college about a dream within a dream. I've known that Borges story for a long time. I think I read it in college originally or just after college. I've taught that story. So, this is nothing like totally new, but like these sort of ideas that maybe we're illusions or the self is an illusion, that used to sort of disturb me. But now it's more of a comfort that there's been a shift in the way I
Right.
think about it. Like, oh, okay, then you can sort of kind of let go. You can just let go of the baggage, like when like things in this sort of plane of existence are getting you down, or there's, you know, it's just it's okay.
I'm sure the older you get, I mean, I can tell you the older I get, the more I realize that no matter how much I've ever worried about anything, when it actually happens, or if it actually happens, it's not nearly as bad as what I thought it was.
It's
And
always the worry that's the worst part for
oh
me.
yeah,
The anxiety,
exactly, exactly.
right?
So maybe that's part of it too.
All right, I don't have anything left to say. I'm going to contemplate all these themes.
We'll have to get together again and catch our listeners up on what we've been up to recently.
Yeah, we'll get back to reality. Like, and it's kind of like, okay, you just did a big move. I got bought out. I've been adjusting to that. So there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it's good to be back on Padula Rasa. We've been in the world of nothing for quite a while. Now we came out of it. Something came out.
Here it is.
If you enjoyed the episode, or if you have comments, we'd love to hear your feedback. Contact us. We're living on Substack now, so you can comment up on that site. But we hope that you enjoyed the show, and we hope you will come back next time.